So it was an intense, difficult, rich family that grew up in Vienna. And Ludwig, the youngest, was considered to then be the most stupid, which is extraordinary. But they loved him. And as I said, he was as I said before, like small boys, interested in engineering, mechanics, and constructing things, which he did. Now, I want to get out of this story because it can continue, really, far too long. But he showed such promise in engineering and then in mathematics and logic that he was sent off to a philosopher in Germany called Frege, who is also very famous. And Frege was amazed by his capacity for logical development and logical expression, not to mention mathematical expression, and suggested that Ludwig go to London, to Cambridge, to study under Bertrand Russell. These anecdotes do continue because they're very important, in a sense that Ludwig could hardly speak English, but he didn't care. He went straight to the master himself, who was considered to be the master, Bertrand Russell, and said to him, I'm not going to repeat the accent, but said to him, if I am stupid, I will be an aeronaut, because he had already been to Manchester to study aeronautical engineering. If I'm stupid, I will be an aeronaut, but if I'm not stupid, I will be a philosopher. Can you do something for me? Russell said, yes, write something for me. And the writing began. Now, the writing that I'm talking about, which eventually came out as Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, was written, it was a very short book, 70 pages, written while he was in the trenches, in fact, in the First World War, is even today virtually incomprehensible, except to the most divine mathematicians and logicians. Really, it is extremely difficult, except for the last 5 pages. Now, a lot of people got that wrong. I don't want to go through the story again, I'm saying this, but the story too much, but some people in Vienna, where he lived, were so impressed by his mathematical and logical abilities that they thought he was a world-class genius, even in expressing himself in such a short book. But they missed the point, and he knew they missed the point. And even when in Cambridge he was given his PhD, he, along with Bertrand Russell and George Moore, another internationally famous philosopher, he clasped them both around the neck and said, you will never, ever understand me, but thank you just the same. And he was given a professorship. But he was never in the usual academic tradition of being a professor. He wanted to be out. In this book, and he said this, I have written all there is needed to be written, except silence, the silence of the words. Now, that was very peculiar for people who were unused to that kind of continental way of thinking. So that he decided to stop. He thought that he had concluded all of the problems of philosophy. And everybody else did too, except for the last 5 pages. And the last 5 pages consisted of things that you cannot really talk about. And these things were aesthetics, art, music, for example, part of being aesthetics, religion that you can't establish. Where do we go? All of these people thought that the crucial concern in his book, his very slight book, and the only book he had ever published in his life, apart from a primer for a school book, it was the only book he ever published. He said, "I have solved all of the problems of philosophy." And the last sentence in that book, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, was this: "Whereof we cannot speak, thereof we must be silent." What he meant by that was mistakenly interpreted around the world by philosophers. What he meant was that I have solved the essential problems of philosophy, certainly, because the essential problems are simply the relationship between a proposition, which is fundamentally the meaning of a sentence, and that to which it refers, which is to say, not a thing in the world, but a fact. Most of that was dealt with mathematically, but the last 5 pages were the crucial ones. He said, all of this is easy. Life is like that, and I have solved the problems of philosophy. But the last 5 pages concerning art, basically, and God, where aesthetic appreciation and unprovability come into place, they're the important things. Now, there were a lot of philosophers around him, certainly in Vienna and in England, who thought that the first part of the book, in which he was explaining the relationship, and may I say, basically what he was saying is, you can look at a very simple proposition, the cat is on the mat, or whatever. The cat is on the mat is sentential. That is to say, it's a sentence, but it's also a proposition, has meaning, and refers to something which exists in the world. That is to say, the cat being on the mat. Now, this might sound very simple, but he made it absolutely crucially important that the proposition is in a pictorial relationship with the fact that it's describing. Now, he thought that was easy, and he thought, in fact, that all of propositions of that kind, factual propositions, could be explained in this way. But there were propositions, the last 5 pages of Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, which could not be explained in that way. For example, this painting by Van Gogh is beautiful and consists of a pair of women's shoes, peasant shoes. You could not say, for example, that God exists because there is no provability there. In other words, he was dividing the nature of human meaning into 2 things. Provability, to a certain extent, by saying something and relating it to something else which happens to be correct. And the second, and apparently most inoffensive part of the book, the last 5 pages, were those in which he said provability is not important. here and cannot be. But the things about which we speak, the beauty of art, for example, the nature of certainty, for example, the nature of God, if He exists, for example, are the most important things in human existence.